In Pennsylvania, 2001, a cold case that haunted an entire community has finally been solved. Dylan Mercer, an 18-year-old college freshman with a passion for photography and a heart full of dreams, vanished one quiet evening, leaving his family and friends desperate for answers. His car was found abandoned on a lonely road, traces of blood hinting at a violent struggle. Years of stalled investigations and silent leads left investigators frustrated, but a breakthrough in DNA evidence would soon change everything. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Dylan Mercer grew up in a town that prided itself on its quiet streets and close-knit community, where neighbors knew each other by name, and children spent afternoons running freely through open fields and tree-lined sidewalks. From an early age, Dylan exhibited an innate curiosity about the world around him, a trait that would later define both his personality and his passions. His parents, proud and protective, described him as a boy with a gentle demeanor, someone who would offer his help before being asked, whether it was assisting his younger siblings with homework or volunteering at local community events. His upbringing was marked by warmth, structure, and encouragement, but like many young people, he carried within him the weight of growing responsibilities and the desire to carve a path for himself beyond the familiarity of his hometown. By the time Dylan reached high school, his interest had expanded, most notably in photography. He became fascinated with capturing ordinary moments and finding extraordinary beauty within them. Weekends and evenings were often spent with his camera in hand, documenting quiet streets at dusk, neighbors' gardens in bloom, or candid moments of friends sharing laughter. His photographs reflected a sensitivity and patience that contrasted with the typical hurried pace of teenage life. Teachers often noted his attention to detail, the careful thought he gave to assignments, and his ability to connect with people in meaningful ways. Friends appreciated his natural charm, his willingness to listen, and the effortless way he could bring levity to even the most stressful situations. His presence in a room was comforting, marked by quiet humor and a natural ability to engage those around him without dominating conversation. When Dylan entered college, the excitement of independence mingled with the pressures of academic rigor. He balanced a demanding schedule of classes with a part-time job at a local cafe, where he was admired by colleagues for his reliability and approachable personality. Working long hours, often during evenings and weekends, Dylan demonstrated a maturity beyond his years, understanding the value of hard work and discipline while still nurturing his creative pursuits. He maintained strong ties with his family, often calling home to check in, sharing anecdotes from his days, or sending photos he had captured on spontaneous outings. He was a young man in transition, straddling the line between adolescence and adulthood, eager to explore the wider world while still anchored by the familiar comfort of his hometown and the love of his family. Despite the apparent simplicity of his daily routine, Dylan carried within him the quiet pressures that many young people face. Balancing school, work, friendships, and personal ambitions created moments of strain, though he rarely revealed them to others. His friends described him as someone who internalized stress, masking worry with a smile or a clever remark. Yet even amid these challenges, Dylan's optimism remained intact. He dreamed of a life beyond the town, a life in which his photography could flourish, and he could make meaningful connections that transcended his immediate surroundings. Weekends were sacred for Dylan. He would often retreat to nearby trails and wooded areas, seeking solitude or companionship with friends who shared his love for the outdoors. These excursions offered him the opportunity to explore nature's beauty while capturing its fleeting moments through his camera lens. Hiking became both a creative outlet and a way to maintain balance in a life increasingly burdened by expectations. He also dedicated time to his siblings, assisting with school projects, tutoring in difficult subjects, and simply sharing in their laughter and achievements. The sense of responsibility he felt toward his family was palpable, a reflection of his inherently caring nature and the values instilled in him from childhood. Socially, Dylan was well regarded in his community. Neighbors admired his reliability, friends trusted him implicitly, and teachers spoke highly of his dedication and empathy. His presence carried an understated confidence, a sense that he belonged while also aspiring to something more. Small gestures, holding doors, offering encouragement, noticing when someone was struggling, illustrated his thoughtful nature. Dylan's life, while seemingly ordinary, contained layers of depth that made him uniquely compelling. He navigated his days with a blend of ambition, kindness, and curiosity, and those who knew him understood that he was a young man poised to leave a mark on the world. Yet beneath the surface of this vibrant life, unnoticed tensions existed. The pressures of academic performance, the responsibilities of work, and the desire to fulfill personal ambitions created moments of internal struggle. Dylan, like many young adults, bore these quietly masking worry behind a facade of cheerfulness and composure. The town's admiration of him and the pride his family felt sometimes obscured the subtle challenges he faced. To outsiders, he appeared unshakable, a model of youthful promise and diligence. But life, as it often does, held unexpected turns that no preparation could foresee. This ordinary life, full of routine and simple joys, laid the foundation for the story that would later shock the community. Dylan Mercer's disappearance did not just take a young man from a town. It interrupted the rhythms of family life, friendship, and communal trust. Those who knew him were left questioning the fragility of safety and the unpredictability of fate. His absence created a void, a silence that echoed through classrooms, cafes, and neighborhood streets where laughter and familiarity had once been constants. The stark contrast between Dylan's vibrant life and the sudden, mysterious absence that would follow created a tension that gripped the town from the first moment he was reported missing. How could a young man so full of life vanish without a trace, leaving only questions in his wake? What events could have unfolded in those final hours that transformed a bright, promising future into a chilling cold case? The answers would remain elusive, teasing investigators and the community alike as the search for Dylan Mercer began. The town braced itself for a series of revelations that would test their understanding of safety, trust, and the limits of justice, leaving a lingering question. Could anyone uncover the truth behind the disappearance of an 18-year-old whose life seemed so ordinary, yet extraordinary in its promise? The evening had arrived with the crisp chill of autumn, painting Pennsylvania in hues of amber and gold. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the fading light cast long shadows across the campus where Dylan Mercer had spent most of his day immersed in photography. The lecture had ended and students were slowly dispersing, their chatter fading into the stillness of the evening. Dylan packed his camera gear and books, offering a cheerful farewell to his classmates. He laughed easily, promising to meet some of his friends later for a casual dinner. No one could have anticipated that this ordinary evening would mark the start of a nightmare that would haunt the community for decades. As he left the building, the campus pathways were nearly empty, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional sound of a car engine or distant footsteps. Dylan's car was parked on a secluded side street, a location he often chose for its privacy. He unlocked the doors, placed his camera bag on the passenger seat, and settled behind the wheel. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw him in the hours that followed. On the surface, nothing seemed amiss. He sent a quick text to a friend, a routine check-in, but the message went unanswered. Hours passed, and when follow-ups came, Dylan's phone remained silent. Texts were left unread, calls went unanswered. The sudden absence of response, uncharacteristic for someone so connected and reliable, sent an unsettling ripple through his circle. By morning, Dylan had not returned home. His roommate, accustomed to late nights at the library or cafe, first noticed his absence when his bed remained untouched, his belongings still neatly in place. At first, assumptions were mundane. Perhaps he had stayed late for a study session or decided on an impromptu drive to clear his mind. But as the hours dragged on, a sense of unease began to settle. His family, expecting him back by dawn, grew increasingly worried. Calls to friends and neighbors produced no answers. The ordinary rhythms of life had been disrupted, replaced by fear, confusion, and an urgent need to find him. The police were alerted, and the search began almost immediately. Officers retraced Dylan's likely routes, combing the streets and paths he frequented. They checked with local businesses, scanning for witnesses who might have seen him walking, driving, or conversing with anyone. Surveillance footage, though limited in 2001, was reviewed, but offered few clues. Friends were questioned repeatedly, their accounts consistent but providing no new leads. Every investigation path seemed to dissolve quickly, leaving police frustrated and family members in despair. The clock ticked relentlessly, each passing hour deepening the fear that something far more sinister had occurred. Community members, once secure in the familiarity of their town, began to feel a creeping sense of vulnerability. Neighborhood streets, normally safe and quiet, seemed strange under the scrutiny of heightened anxiety. Conversations in coffee shops and on front porches were punctuated by speculation. Who could do such a thing, and why? Parents clutched their children a little tighter. Friends exchanged worried glances, and whispers of what might have happened circulated without end. In a town where everyone knew each other, the disappearance of one bright, vibrant young man created ripples of fear and suspicion, leaving no one untouched by the uncertainty of the night. Throughout the day, Dylan's personal items remained in his car untouched, a haunting marker of his last known movements. His camera, laptop, and books sat where he had left them, offering investigators the first tangible evidence of the sudden interruption of his life. The absence of a struggle inside the vehicle, and the lack of forced entry, suggested that whatever had happened occurred either in a moment of distraction or under circumstances that Dylan could not have anticipated. Each detail added to the perplexity of the case. How could a young man vanish in broad daylight, or in a populated area without leaving a trace or drawing attention? As police organized search teams, volunteers from the community joined, scouring wooded areas, sidewalks, and streets. Flyers were distributed, photos of Dylan posted in shops and on telephone poles, and local media broadcasted alerts. But despite the mobilization of resources and manpower, each lead evaporated, each tip turned cold. Days later, the silence remained deafening. The ordinary rhythms of the town were now overshadowed by dread, with parents, classmates, and friends all silently asking the same question. Where had Dylan gone, and what had happened that night? The eerie stillness of that autumn night became emblematic of the uncertainty and fear gripping the town. People who had once taken their community's safety for granted now realized how fragile it truly was. Dylan Mercer's sudden disappearance challenged not only the town's sense of security, but also its collective understanding of human vulnerability. Friends who had shared late-night walks or coffee shop conversations with him replayed every interaction, trying to identify a sign, a hint, a warning that might explain what had occurred. Each memory became a point of anxiety, each ordinary moment scrutinized in hindsight. By evening, with darkness settling over the town, the gravity of Dylan's absence was undeniable. The police had exhausted initial search efforts, and the community's fear had escalated into palpable tension. Questions began to dominate thoughts. Could he have been abducted, or had something accidental occurred? Was he still alive somewhere, or was the worst already a reality? The answers were unknown, leaving the community teetering on the edge of despair. The night that had started like any other had transformed into a harrowing mystery, one that would define the town's collective memory for years to come. As the search intensified and investigators meticulously retraced every possible route, the question lingered over every street, alley, and trail Dylan might have traveled. How could a single evening erase someone so alive, so present, leaving behind no witnesses and no clear path to follow? The town's nightmare had only just begun, and the events of that night would continue to haunt every family, friend, and neighbor involved. What had truly happened to Dylan Mercer in those final hours? The answer remained hidden, a shadow over Pennsylvania, waiting for the moment it would finally emerge. 2 days after Dylan Mercer disappeared, the quiet Pennsylvania town that had been on edge since his absence faced the first undeniable proof that something terrible had occurred. A hiker, walking a remote trail on the outskirts of town, stumbled across Dylan's car. The vehicle was out of place, tucked between trees and brush where few ventured. Its doors were left slightly ajar, as though abandoned in haste, and a dark smear across the driver's seat hinted at violence that no one wanted to acknowledge. The sight was jarring in the soft, muted light of the early morning, a visual confirmation of every parent's and friend's worst fear. For the hiker, the moment was chilling, a sudden confrontation with the reality that an 18-year-old's life had been violently disrupted in a town that prided itself on safety. Inside the car, Dylan's camera lay untouched, its strap twisted across the passenger seat. Memory cards were still inside, full of photographs documenting the life he had lived only hours or days before his disappearance. Each image captured moments that now carried a bittersweet weight. Friends laughing, streets he walked, sunrises over familiar hills. the town he loved and that had loved him. The camera became an unintentional witness to his final hours, silent yet insistent, preserving a life that had been interrupted in the most abrupt and violent way. Investigators carefully removed the device, treating it as a critical piece of evidence. They photographed the interior, the bloodstain and the surrounding area, methodically documenting every detail that could shed light on the growing mystery. The investigation at the scene was meticulous but frustrating. Forensic teams scoured the area surrounding the car, combing for fingerprints, fibers, or any trace that might indicate who had been involved. Each careful sweep, each chemical test, each photograph brought no answers. The blood in the driver's seat confirmed what had been suspected. Dylan had been hurt, and the extent of the violence was yet unknown. Yet no fingerprints were found beyond his own. No personal items seemed out of place except for the signs of struggle, and no witnesses had come forward to explain how or why the car had ended up in such a remote location. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the vehicle and his belongings as markers of a life suddenly interrupted. As news of the discovery spread, the town collectively held its breath. The local police were suddenly under pressure to act, their prior days of searching now punctuated by grim reality. Family members arrived at the scene, their grief immediate and overwhelming. Friends and neighbors gathered, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. How could someone so alive, so vibrant, simply disappear in the place he had known his whole life? The roads, trails, and familiar streets where Dylan had walked now became haunting spaces, reminders of a young life that had been violently interrupted. Each question raised by the discovery seemed only to multiply, leaving investigators and the community alike grasping for answers that were not immediately forthcoming. Police and forensic teams worked tirelessly, cataloging every photograph, every object, and every trace of evidence they could find. Blood samples were carefully collected and sent to labs for analysis, but the lack of additional physical evidence created frustration. Officers canvassed the area, speaking with hikers, joggers, and anyone who might have passed through the trail that day. Yet despite the flurry of activity, no one had seen anything suspicious. No unusual vehicles, no strangers, no witnesses could account for Dylan's disappearance. The sense of helplessness was pervasive. Every avenue explored seemed to dead end, and the possibility that he had been intentionally targeted weighed heavily on the minds of investigators. Meanwhile, Dylan's family confronted a mixture of grief, confusion, and desperate hope. They combed through the photographs from his camera, searching for overlooked clues, patterns, or even a hint that might explain what had happened. Friends revisited their last encounters with him, retracing steps and recalling conversations, trying to find inconsistencies or anything that could suggest motive. The inability to piece together a coherent narrative heightened the anguish. Each day without an answer deepened their sorrow and frustration, leaving the shadow of uncertainty in every thought and conversation. The community, too, was shaken to its core. Pennsylvania residents who had once felt secure within the town's borders were suddenly aware that violence and tragedy could touch anyone, even someone as familiar and beloved as Dylan Mercer. Schools, cafes, and public spaces became tinged with unease. Conversations turned cautious, and the town's sense of collective safety eroded. People asked questions out loud that had no immediate answers. Was this an isolated act? Was someone within the community responsible? How could a young man vanish so completely in the place he had called home for nearly 2 decades? As law enforcement expanded their investigation, the lack of a clear motive or suspect only intensified the sense of mystery. Every detail was scrutinized, every potential lead pursued, yet each pathway ended in frustration. The questions loomed larger than the answers. What had happened in those hours between Dylan leaving campus and his car being discovered? Could this have been the work of a stranger? Or was there a more personal, hidden connection to the events that unfolded? The answers remained obscured, hidden in the shadows that had grown heavier with each passing hour. The discovery of the car marked a pivotal point in the case. It confirmed that Dylan's disappearance was no simple runaway or a minor misadventure. There was undeniable evidence that something violent and deliberate had taken place. Yet the trail remained fragmented, elusive, and puzzling. Investigators were left to confront the stark reality that the resolution of this case would require persistence, patience, and perhaps the intervention of new technologies that had not yet been developed at the time of his disappearance. The haunting image of Dylan's abandoned car and his untouched camera would remain imprinted on the community's memory, a stark symbol of a life interrupted and a mystery that demanded answers. Even as days turned into weeks, and the initial shock of discovery rippled outward, one question continued to dominate every conversation, every thought, every investigative effort. How could a young man vanish so completely in his own hometown, leaving behind a car, a camera, and a trail of uncertainty? Was this a case of isolated violence, or did something deeper, more sinister, lie hidden beneath the surface? The town's nightmare had only deepened, and the true story of Dylan Mercer's final hours remained just out of reach, waiting for the moment when someone would finally unravel the truth. The discovery of Dylan Mercer's abandoned car marked the beginning of what would become a painstaking, methodical investigation, one that drew on every available resource but quickly revealed the limits of human effort against the unknown. In the immediate aftermath, police launched an aggressive search operation, determined to locate Dylan and understand the circumstances of his disappearance. Neighborhoods were canvassed systematically. Officers knocked on doors, spoke to residents, and retraced the young man's usual routes. Investigators moved with urgency, aware that every hour could be critical. But even as they pursued leads, the case resisted resolution. Friends, classmates, and acquaintances became central figures in the investigation. Law enforcement conducted hours of interviews, probing memories and timelines, seeking even the smallest inconsistencies that might hint at the night's events. Each conversation was meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and analyzed. Detectives attempted to piece together Dylan's last known movements with precision, seeking patterns or anomalies in his behavior that could provide insight. Friends described the evening before his disappearance, recounting casual moments and mundane exchanges, yet nothing pointed toward the violence that had abruptly interrupted his life. The apparent normalcy of his final hours only heightened the sense of mystery. As the investigation progressed, timelines were scrutinized with intense detail. Every phone call, every text message, and every observed movement was logged and compared against known facts. Police worked tirelessly to identify anyone who might have seen Dylan, interviewing dozens of people over days and weeks. Yet, despite the exhaustive nature of the investigation, leads repeatedly turned cold. Witness accounts often conflicted. Some remembered details differently, while others recanted statements entirely. Each dead end deepened the frustration of law enforcement and fueled the anxiety of Dylan's family, who followed every development with a mixture of hope and dread. The early investigation was further complicated by a mixture of community rumor and misinformation. In small towns, stories spread quickly, often distorting facts or creating new questions. Some residents whispered about potential suspects while others speculated about motive and circumstance. Unfortunately, some tips lacked credibility, requiring investigators to dedicate time and resources to paths that ultimately led nowhere. Additionally, suspicions of corruption or mishandled evidence, though unconfirmed, began to circulate, creating tension between the police and the community. These allegations, while unproven, intensified the emotional stakes of the case, casting shadows over an already complicated investigation. Despite these challenges, family members refused to remain silent. Dylan's parents attended press briefings, speaking with journalists and appealing directly to the public for assistance. Flyers bearing Dylan's photograph and details of his disappearance were distributed across town and neighboring areas. School bulletin boards, local cafes, and community centers carried posters in the hope that someone, somewhere, might have information that could shed light on his fate. Their tireless advocacy, however, often collided with the frustration of stalled leads and inconclusive evidence. Each unanswered question became a weight on the family, a reminder of the uncertainty that permeated their lives. The anxiety within the town continued to build. Streets that had once been safe and familiar now seemed haunted by possibility. Residents questioned the safety of their neighborhoods and the vulnerability of their children, while the idea that a young man could disappear without a trace created an atmosphere of pervasive unease. Conversations that were once casual now carried undertones of worry. Parents asked themselves whether they could truly protect their families, and friends wondered how someone so well known and cared for could vanish in a community where everyone thought they knew one another. Police expanded the investigation beyond immediate geographic boundaries, speaking with anyone who might have had contact with Dylan in the days leading up to his disappearance. Each lead was pursued diligently. Security camera footage from local businesses, statements from late-night workers, and interviews with drivers and passers-by. Yet the evidence was sparse, providing little more than fragments that hinted at the truth but failed to form a coherent narrative. Each dead end intensified the sense that Dylan's disappearance was extraordinary, defying the expectations of a town accustomed to safety and predictability. Amid these challenges, investigators considered potential motives. They explored whether Dylan's disappearance was random, opportunistic, or targeted. The absence of forced entry or theft suggested that robbery was unlikely. Personal relationships, interactions with acquaintances, and conflicts were examined closely. But investigators found no clear animosities or threats that could have precipitated such violence. The lack of a discernible motive further complicated efforts to reconstruct the events leading to Dylan's disappearance. It was a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit together, a challenge that tested both investigative skill and the patience of those seeking answers. Despite exhaustive efforts, every angle seemed explored, every theory debated, and every potential clue analyzed, yet the case remained unsolved. The town wrestled with disbelief and frustration, unable to comprehend how a community so tight-knit could witness the disappearance of one of its own without understanding what had occurred. Dylan Mercer's absence was a void that stretched beyond the confines of his home, his classroom, and his familiar haunts. It permeated the town's sense of security and collective consciousness. The unanswered questions weighed heavily on every family, friend, and neighbor invested in the investigation. As investigators retraced steps, interviewed witnesses, and attempted to create a timeline of Dylan's final hours, one fundamental question dominated the search. Was Dylan still alive, somewhere beyond reach, or had the truth of that night already been buried along with him? The uncertainty, the frustration, and the lack of tangible answers left everyone, police, family, and community, grappling with the same haunting thought. How could a young man so vibrant and alive simply vanish from the world he had known, leaving behind no clear trace, no witness, and no immediate explanation? The town was left suspended in a state of tension and fear, waiting for a breakthrough that seemed, at that moment, impossibly out of reach. The early investigation had laid the groundwork, cataloging evidence and memories, but it had also exposed the complexity of disappearing into the fabric of one's own community. Every interview, every canvassed street, and every tip pursued revealed the limits of human perception and the challenges of uncovering truth in the absence of witnesses or motive. The case was unfolding, yet the answers were stubbornly elusive. With each passing day, the question persisted. How could Dylan Mercer disappear so completely, leaving a town in shock and a family desperate for clarity? The search for answers was only beginning, and the story of that night remained shrouded in uncertainty, demanding that investigators push forward despite the mounting obstacles. As the years passed after Dylan Mercer's disappearance, the intensity of the initial search and investigation gradually faded, leaving a vacuum of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. What had once been a flurry of police activity, media coverage, and community concern slowed to a muted hum, punctuated only by the occasional media reminder of a young man still missing. Dylan's name became synonymous with tragedy, a symbol of the fragility of safety in a small town, and the lingering anguish of families left without closure. Every milestone of his life passed quietly in absentia. Birthdays, school graduations, and community events that he might have attended were now commemorated in his absence, a stark reminder of the life interrupted. For law enforcement, the investigation entered a period of dormancy. Leads that had seemed promising initially dried up under scrutiny. Witnesses' memories faded, and potential suspects remained elusive. Each tip was painstakingly followed, each rumor investigated, yet every avenue concluded without resolution. Files once meticulously organized on detectives' desks gradually gathered dust, their contents a testament to human diligence, stalled by the limitations of circumstance. The very evidence that might have unlocked the case's mysteries seemed locked away in time, out of reach until a breakthrough could emerge. Despite tireless effort, the trail went cold, leaving both investigators and the community frustrated, exhausted, and uncertain about the future. Dylan's parents refused to accept the silence. Their grief was raw, profound, and unrelenting, but it fueled a relentless determination to keep his story alive. They organized press campaigns appearing in newspapers and on local television, reminding the town and authorities that Dylan Mercer was not forgotten. Anniversaries of his disappearance became somber markers of endurance, each year a painful reminder of a child lost and the justice still unclaimed. Flyers were distributed, photographs displayed, and community events often carried messages appealing for any information, no matter how small. Yet each effort, while meaningful, confronted the same obstacle. The passage of time had blurred memories, eroded evidence, and left the case increasingly difficult to resolve. Friends of Dylan mourned privately, navigating their grief in quiet, personal ways. Some spoke to journalists recounting memories of his laughter, his kindness, his curiosity about the world around him. Others avoided public attention entirely, carrying the weight of uncertainty in isolation. The town itself bore the weight collectively. Its streets, schools, and neighborhoods carried a quiet tension, an unspoken acknowledgement that a life had been violently disrupted and that answers remained beyond reach. Parents spoke with heightened caution to their children, neighbors eyed unfamiliar faces with subtle suspicion, and ordinary routines were tinged with the awareness of what could happen even in the safest of towns. The unresolved nature of the case had a corrosive effect on every community member who had known Dylan, those who had once shared daily interactions with him. Classmates, neighbors, co-workers found themselves haunted by the absence. Conversations revisited the night of his disappearance, searching for overlooked clues or conversations that might have offered insight. Every memory became a puzzle piece in a story that refused to come together, each recollection tinged with frustration and grief. The lack of answers created an emotional fatigue that extended beyond the immediate family, a slow and pervasive tension that permeated the town's consciousness. Even as the years accumulated, there remained a spark of hope. Investigators and family alike clung to the possibility that science or technology might eventually provide the breakthroughs human effort had failed to uncover. Advancements in forensic science, evolving DNA analysis, and renewed attention to cold cases provided a glimmer of possibility. This spark, though faint, kept the case alive in memory and in pursuit. Families shared stories with the hope that public attention might generate new leads, and officers revisited files, considering fresh angles with the benefit of hindsight and modern techniques. The awareness that a solution could exist beyond the reach of conventional investigation kept the flame of hope alive. Yet with hope came frustration and lingering doubt. Each passing year heightened the sense of injustice, the unfulfilled need for closure, and the absence of accountability for the young man who had vanished. Dylan's absence was a persistent void, a reminder of vulnerability and the unpredictability of human experience. Questions mounted. Was Dylan still alive somewhere, isolated and struggling, or had the circumstances of that night already sealed his fate? Could a long-dormant case be revived, or would the details of his disappearance remain forever shrouded in mystery? These questions haunted the town and Dylan's family, shaping their perceptions of safety, trust, and the limits of justice. The psychological toll on those involved was immense. Dylan's parents wrestled with grief while maintaining their daily lives, balancing work, social obligations, and the emotional labor of persistent advocacy. Investigators, once consumed by the immediacy of active leads, now faced the frustration of a case constrained by time and fading evidence. Each step forward seemed to require disproportionately greater effort. Every potential lead met with skepticism and caution. Even the most minor clue was scrutinized for relevance, weighed against the decades of uncertainty that had already accumulated. The balance between hope and despair became a daily negotiation for all involved, a precarious attempt to maintain faith and resolution while confronting the harsh reality of cold case investigations. Despite these challenges, the community remained connected to Dylan's story. Public gatherings, school events, and local media occasionally reignited conversations, reminders that the case had not been forgotten. Neighbors and friends checked in with the family, offering support and encouragement, though the answers they sought were often absent. The sense of shared loss was both a burden and a unifying force, reinforcing the reality that Dylan's disappearance had impacted far more than a single household. It had altered the rhythm of an entire town. Even in the face of stagnation, a question persisted that refused to dissipate. Was there still a path to justice for Dylan Mercer? Could new technology, new investigators, or the determination of those unwilling to surrender uncover what had remained hidden for so long? Or would his story, full of potential and promise, remain a haunting memory, a cautionary tale of vulnerability and unresolved tragedy in the heart of Pennsylvania? The uncertainty persisted like a shadow over the town, a weight pressing on every memory, every conversation, and every quiet corner of Dylan's world. In the silence of passing years, Dylan's name remained more than a memory. It became a symbol of unresolved grief, of the limitations of traditional investigation, and of the resilience required to continue searching despite overwhelming odds. The town's sense of security had been fractured, and while life continued around the absence, the specter of his disappearance lingered. In this uneasy limbo between hope and despair, one undeniable truth emerged. No matter how much time passed, the spark of discovery remained, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Could human persistence, paired with the advances of science, finally bring answers? Or would Dylan Mercer's story remain an unresolved chapter in Pennsylvania's history, a question mark that refused to be answered? Nearly 2 decades after Dylan Mercer's disappearance, the case that had haunted Pennsylvania for years experienced an unexpected resurgence. Advances in forensic science, particularly in DNA technology, had transformed the possibilities for solving cold cases once thought unsolvable. Investigators who had long faced the frustration of dead ends, faded memories, and limited evidence now found themselves with tools far beyond what had been available in 2001. Laboratories could analyze even degraded biological samples with a precision previously unimaginable, and databases now contained profiles from across the state and nation, providing avenues to identify suspects who had previously gone undetected. The old evidence from Dylan's car, including bloodstains, hair fibers, and fingerprints, was carefully re-examined under these new technologies. Each item preserved in careful storage was treated as though it held the key to unlocking the decades-old mystery. Forensic experts painstakingly ran these samples through modern databases, seeking matches that might point investigators in the right direction. Memory cards from Dylan's camera were also revisited, scanned for any overlooked metadata or clues that could help reconstruct his last known movements. Every detail, no matter how small, became critical in a renewed effort to bring clarity to the years of uncertainty. The breakthrough came when a DNA profile extracted from traces left in Dylan's car produced a match. It was a profile linked to a suspect who had been overlooked in the original investigation, someone who had not previously appeared on law enforcement's radar. The discovery was electrifying, yet investigators approached it with cautious optimism. They knew that decades of unresolved cases often included false leads, contaminated evidence, or coincidental matches. Careful confirmation was essential before any conclusions could be drawn, and protocols were rigorously followed to ensure that the integrity of the case was maintained. Alongside the DNA breakthrough, tips from anonymous sources began to surface, adding layers to the evolving investigation. Some tips were vague, others more precise, pointing to potential locations, timelines, or behavioral patterns of individuals connected to Dylan's disappearance. Investigators cross-referenced these new pieces of information with existing evidence, seeking correlations that could strengthen the case. Every discovery, every new lead, reignited hope for Dylan's family and the community that had waited years for answers. Yet the progress was tempered by the awareness that science alone could not provide the full story. Human interpretation, context, and further investigation remained critical. The tension in the town grew palpable as news of the DNA match filtered through law enforcement channels and eventually reached family members. After years of uncertainty, the possibility that justice might finally be within reach generated a complex mix of emotions. Relief, fear, anticipation, and even anxiety about what the confirmation of a suspect might mean. Dylan's parents, who had spent decades advocating for answers, felt a cautious sense of vindication, tempered by the long road still ahead. Friends and neighbors watched with bated breath, their imaginations filled with questions about the suspect, the motivations behind the crime, and the potential for closure after so many years. Despite the hope, investigators remained methodical. The match alone could not convict. It could only guide them to further inquiry. Surveillance footage, travel records, and historical accounts were cross-checked against the new evidence. Interviews were renewed, with detectives seeking clarification, corroboration, and context from individuals previously questioned. The goal was not simply to connect a suspect to Dylan's disappearance, but to reconstruct the events of that night with as much accuracy as possible establishing a clear narrative that could stand up in court. The community, long accustomed to the stagnancy of a cold case, experienced a renewed engagement. Local media covered the developments carefully, balancing excitement with the need for accuracy. Public discussions surfaced, often tinged with decades of accumulated grief and speculation. Yet even amid this renewed attention, questions persisted. Could the DNA lead definitively to the real perpetrator? Or might it reveal additional complexities in a case already complicated by time, fading memories, and previous investigative limitations? The uncertainty remained a shadow, reminding everyone involved that breakthroughs did not automatically equate to resolution. For Dylan's family, each day of the renewed investigation was a delicate mix of anticipation and apprehension. They revisited old memories, combed through photographs, and reflected on the long years of absence, wondering whether the suspect identified by DNA would finally provide answers or deepen their pain. The hope that justice might soon be served existed alongside the recognition that the process could uncover difficult truths, including the nature of the crime and the life of the individual responsible. Emotions ran high, as decades of grief and unresolved questions were suddenly reframed in a new context that demanded attention, patience, and resilience. Investigators also recognized the limitations imposed by time. While modern technology could identify a suspect, human testimony, physical evidence beyond DNA, and corroborating accounts were still essential to construct a viable case. They pursued each thread with rigor, cross-referencing every new tip with existing records. Every development required careful documentation, analysis, and strategic planning to ensure that the momentum created by the breakthrough would not be lost to error or oversight. The community's anticipation was mirrored by law enforcement's careful deliberation. While the DNA match offered hope, it also posed new challenges, verifying the suspect's involvement, determining motive, and reconstructing events long past. Investigators knew that a premature declaration of progress could damage the integrity of the case. Patience, discipline, and meticulous attention to detail were now more critical than ever. Amid the cautious optimism, the lingering question remained, haunting every conversation and every investigative decision. Would this technological breakthrough finally pierce the long shadows of Dylan Mercer's disappearance, or would it lead to yet another layer of frustration and unanswered questions? The uncertainty created both pressure and focus, propelling law enforcement forward while keeping the community tethered to the hope that justice, long delayed, might finally arrive. Each day brought the possibility of resolution closer, but the ultimate truth of what happened during those fateful hours remained just out of reach, waiting for human diligence to pair with scientific innovation. As investigators pursued the suspect identified by DNA, the case evolved from decades-old cold file to an active, high-stakes investigation. The renewed focus reinvigorated the town, but it also reminded everyone involved of the gravity of the crime and the life lost. The breakthrough was more than a technical achievement. It was a chance to restore justice and memory, to finally confront the shadow that had loomed over Pennsylvania for so long. Yet the question persisted. Could the DNA lead to the real perpetrator, or would it open new questions, further complicating a story already burdened by decades of uncertainty? The news broke quietly at first, in law enforcement bulletins and internal memos, but it quickly swept through Pennsylvania like wildfire. After nearly 2 decades of uncertainty, a suspect in Dylan Mercer's disappearance had been apprehended. The man, a local resident whose name had appeared briefly in early investigative reports but who had never been considered a serious threat, was now facing arrest. The DNA match, painstakingly verified, provided the foundation, but investigators also presented corroborating evidence that suggested involvement far beyond mere coincidence. The culmination of years of investigative stagnation had finally arrived, transforming a cold case into a live, high-stakes criminal proceeding. The arrest stunned Dylan's family. His parents, who had spent countless years appealing for information, distributing flyers, and keeping their son's story alive in the public eye, experienced a mixture of relief, disbelief, and renewed grief. For decades, the absence of answers had shaped every aspect of their lives, and now, after all the waiting and uncertainty, the reality of a suspect in custody brought a tangible yet complicated sense of closure. Their emotions were raw, layered with the knowledge that the events of that night were not only explainable but potentially comprehensible for the first time. Community reaction was equally complex. In a town that had long mourned Dylan's disappearance and grappled with the unsettling idea that violence could strike so close to home, shock and anger intertwined. Some residents demanded immediate answers, wanting clarity about the circumstances of Dylan's disappearance and the suspect's motivations. Others felt a quiet relief, recognizing that the decades-long absence had finally produced actionable results. Conversations in neighborhoods, cafes, and workplaces were dominated by speculation about the suspect's identity, connections, and behavior in the hours leading up to Dylan's vanishing. Pennsylvania, once silent in fear, was now alive with questions, conjectures, and cautious optimism. Media coverage surged, turning a local tragedy into a statewide story. News outlets focused on both the technological breakthrough that had made the arrest possible and the decades of persistence by Dylan's family and law enforcement. Reporters highlighted the human side of the investigation, chronicling the grief of parents, the quiet mourning of friends, and the collective anxiety of a town left in the shadow of uncertainty for years. At the same time, coverage detailed the investigative efforts that had led to this moment. The careful verification of DNA evidence, the re-examination of old leads, and the integration of new tips from anonymous sources. The story captured a broad audience not only for the drama of the arrest, but for the hope it represented that justice could be served, even after years of silence. Details of the arrest revealed a chilling narrative. Investigators described meticulous planning by the suspect, his evasive behavior, and actions that hinted at forethought to avoid detection. Each revelation deepened the shock for a community that had assumed the case was lost to time. Police described the suspect's presence near key locations linked to Dylan's final hours, movements that aligned with evidence previously left unexplained. These connections, once overlooked, painted a clearer picture of the events that had led to Dylan's disappearance. For the first time, the town was beginning to see the contours of a narrative that had remained obscured for nearly 20 years. The arrest also inspired a broader response among families of other victims. News of modern DNA technology bringing results after decades of uncertainty provided hope that cases long considered cold might yet be resolved. Families reached out to law enforcement, seeking guidance on how their own tragedies might be revisited. The success of the investigation demonstrated that persistence, combined with evolving forensic science, could pierce the veil of time. It reinforced the belief that even the most stagnant cases were not beyond reach, offering a measure of solace for communities across the state still searching for closure. Despite the hope and media attention, questions persisted. Could the arrest truly bring closure for Dylan's family and the Pennsylvania community? Or were there layers of truth still concealed beneath the surface? Investigators knew that the suspect's apprehension was only the beginning. Establishing motive, reconstructing the final hours, and ensuring a thorough legal process required continued diligence. Each step demanded careful coordination between law enforcement, prosecutors, and forensic experts. The work that had begun decades earlier now accelerated, but the complexity of the case required meticulous attention to detail to ensure that justice would be fully realized. The town's atmosphere reflected the conflicting emotions of the moment. Streets once silent with uncertainty were now abuzz with speculation. Conversations ranged from shock and fear to cautious hope and support for the ongoing investigation. Residents revisited their memories of Dylan, recalling his laughter, his kindness, and the presence he had held in their community. The arrest rekindled the shared mourning, but also offered a potential path forward, a means to understand the events that had left the town suspended in fear for years. For Dylan's family, the arrest was a complex emotional experience. Relief was tempered by renewed grief as they contemplated the reality of what the suspect might reveal about Dylan's final hours. The anticipation of legal proceedings, witness testimony, and court revelations introduced a new layer of uncertainty, even amid the hope that justice might finally be achieved. Parents and siblings prepared to confront decades of pain, now reframed within the context of accountability and truth. The arrest transformed their grief into a focused determination to see the process through, ensuring that Dylan's memory and story would be honored with clarity and integrity. Investigators continued to pursue corroboration, carefully integrating decades-old evidence with the modern insights that led to the arrest. Witnesses were re-interviewed, locations revisited, and prior assumptions re-examined. Each new layer of information helped construct a more complete timeline, gradually revealing a story that had been obscured by time, fear, and uncertainty. The community watched as this reconstruction unfolded, understanding that while the arrest represented a major step, it did not yet provide all the answers they had long sought. The arrest of the suspect marked a turning point in Pennsylvania's 2001 cold case. Decades of unanswered questions, fear, and grief had culminated in a moment of potential resolution. Yet as the details emerged, one overarching question remained unresolved. Could this arrest bring true closure for Dylan Mercer's family and community? Or were there additional layers, truths, and hidden events yet to surface? The shadow that had loomed over the town since Dylan's disappearance was lifting slightly, but the full story of that fateful night remained just out of reach, waiting to be revealed in the legal proceedings that lay ahead. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation the day Dylan Mercer's trial began. After nearly 2 decades, the man accused of his disappearance was finally facing formal charges. The air was tense, every corner of the room weighted with years of grief, anticipation, and unresolved questions. Family members, friends, and community members filled the benches, their expressions a mixture of hope, fear, and exhaustion. For Dylan's parents, each step into the courthouse felt surreal. Decades of waiting, wondering, and fearing the unknown had led to this moment. Yet the path to closure was still fraught with uncertainty. Prosecutors opened the case with a careful, deliberate presentation, laying out the evidence in chronological order to reconstruct the events surrounding Dylan's disappearance. They highlighted the DNA evidence recovered from Dylan's abandoned car and personal effects, explaining in meticulous detail how modern forensic techniques had made this match possible. Forensic experts testified about the integrity of the samples, the methods of collection, and the confirmation procedures that verified the suspect's connection to the case. This evidence formed the backbone of the prosecution's narrative, providing scientific weight to a case that had remained unresolved for nearly 20 years. In addition to DNA, prosecutors relied on a wide range of corroborating evidence gathered over decades. Witness testimony was carefully selected to provide context and fill gaps left by the passage of time. Friends and neighbors recounted the last moments they had spent with Dylan, offering insights into his personality, routines, and the ordinary nature of his life before the fateful night. Investigators were called to explain the re-examination of old evidence, the use of anonymous tips, and the procedural steps taken to ensure the integrity of the investigation. Together, these pieces created a coherent timeline intended to guide the jury through the complex layers of a case spanning decades. The defense approached their role with equal intensity, scrutinizing every detail of the prosecution's case. They questioned methods, timelines, and interpretations of evidence, attempting to cast doubt on the certainty of the DNA match and the validity of corroborating accounts. Forensic procedures were challenged, memories questioned, and the reliability of witnesses examined under cross-examination. The defense sought to remind the jury that human error, misinterpretation, or coincidence could not be ruled out, emphasizing the importance of reasonable doubt in determining guilt. Each argument was methodically presented, forcing the courtroom to grapple with the fine line between scientific certainty and legal standards. Throughout the trial, Dylan's family endured a deeply emotional experience. Every testimony, every piece of evidence presented, brought memories of the young man they had lost rushing back. The images captured on his camera, the details of his final days, and the painstaking recounting of investigative findings were simultaneously a tribute and a torment. Each witness's words were a reminder of the ordinary life that had been interrupted so abruptly, the moments of joy, laughter, and potential now forever frozen in time. Their silent anguish was visible in the courtroom, a testament to the enduring pain of unresolved loss and the fragile hope that justice could bring a measure of peace. For the jury, the trial was a daunting endeavor. They faced decades of evidence, scientific analysis, and personal recollections, all converging to form a narrative of extraordinary complexity. The task required not only comprehension of advanced forensic methods, but also the ability to weigh the credibility of memories stretched across years. Each day of deliberation was intensive, requiring the jurors to sift through conflicting testimony, reconcile timelines, and consider the implications of emerging technological advancements in DNA analysis. The weight of their decision carried both legal and emotional consequences, as the community watched closely for justice long delayed. The courtroom also highlighted the broader challenges inherent in cold cases. Institutional limitations, procedural gaps, and the evolving nature of forensic science were recurring themes. Questions arose about how earlier investigative choices might have impacted the trajectory of the case, and whether societal systems were adequately equipped to address crimes that remained unsolved for decades. Legal experts and observers reflected on the balance between technological innovation and procedural rigor, recognizing that Dylan Mercer's case represented not only the pursuit of justice for a single individual but also a test of systemic effectiveness in responding to long-delayed crimes. Media coverage during the trial amplified the public's engagement. Local news outlets, online platforms, and investigative journalists followed the proceedings closely, reporting on courtroom dynamics, witness testimony, and legal strategies. Public interest was high, fueled by the rarity of a cold case remaining unresolved for so long and ultimately producing an arrest and trial. Coverage emphasized both the human and procedural dimensions of the case, the enduring grief of Dylan's family, the painstaking efforts of investigators, and the societal fascination with the intersection of technology and justice. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. The jury, having carefully weighed every piece of evidence, returned a decision that resonated through the courtroom and the community at large. Justice at long last had been served. The man accused of involvement in Dylan Mercer's disappearance was held accountable under the law, providing a measure of resolution for the family who had waited decades for closure. Yet even as relief washed over some, questions persisted about the broader implications of the case. How could similar tragedies be prevented in the future? Were there systemic failures that allowed a young man to vanish undetected for so long? Or was this an extraordinary instance where technology finally bridged the gap between past oversight and present accountability? For Dylan's family, the verdict did not erase grief, but it transformed it. The uncertainty that had haunted them for nearly 20 years was replaced with clarity, a sense that their son's story had been heard, acknowledged, and adjudicated. The courtroom experience had been harrowing, but the resolution provided a foundation upon which they could begin to process their loss in a new light. Friends and community members, too, experienced a collective exhalation, relief tempered by reflection, pride in the perseverance of law enforcement, and acknowledgement of the enduring power of hope and technological advancement. Yet even with the verdict, the trial served as a reminder that justice is both a legal process and a societal reflection. Institutional failures, delays in investigative capacity, and the need for constant innovation in forensic science were highlighted, emphasizing that lessons from Dylan Mercer's case could inform future efforts to prevent similar tragedies. The town, while relieved that accountability had been established, remained contemplative, recognizing the delicate balance between human diligence, technological innovation, and the enduring need for vigilance in protecting young lives. As the courtroom emptied and the media recounted the decision, the overarching question persisted. Could society prevent such tragedies in the future? Or was Dylan Mercer's case an exceptional instance where time, technology, and persistence converged to provide justice? The answers were complex, but the process illuminated the importance of perseverance, the evolving capabilities of science, and the enduring impact of unresolved crimes on families and communities alike. Dylan's story, once lost to uncertainty, now stood as both a testament to resilience and a lesson for the generations that would follow. Dylan Mercer's disappearance and the decades-long journey toward resolution left an indelible mark not only on his family and hometown, but on the broader landscape of law enforcement and community awareness. In the years following his arrest and the successful prosecution of the suspect, Dylan's family committed themselves to ensuring that his legacy would extend far beyond tragedy. They established scholarships in his name for aspiring photographers, honoring his love of capturing life through the lens while supporting young people who shared his curiosity and creative ambition. These scholarships became a way to celebrate Dylan's vibrancy and remind students that even in the shadow of loss, passion and dedication could flourish. Beyond educational initiatives, The Mercer family also founded community programs focused on youth engagement, safety awareness, and advocacy for victims' families. Workshops, mentorship programs, and support networks were created to help other families navigate the difficult and often isolating experience of having a missing loved one. Through these efforts, Dylan's life and untimely death became a source of empowerment, encouraging others to persist in the face of uncertainty and to utilize resources available to protect themselves and their communities. His story became a vehicle for positive action, turning grief into purposeful advocacy. The impact of Dylan's case extended into law enforcement procedures as well. Recognizing the challenges presented by decades-old evidence, agencies in Pennsylvania adopted improved cold case protocols. DNA reanalysis programs were implemented, enabling forensic experts to revisit unresolved cases using advanced technology. Procedures for preserving evidence, documenting leads, and maintaining open lines of communication with families were re-examined and strengthened. Dylan Mercer's story became a benchmark, demonstrating the importance of perseverance, technological integration, and continual review in solving cases long considered stagnant. Police departments and investigative units drew lessons from the case, striving to prevent similar delays in justice and to better support families enduring prolonged uncertainty. Within Dylan's hometown, his memory was enshrined through public memorials, exhibitions, and commemorative events. Parks were dedicated in his name, serving as spaces where community members could reflect, connect, and honor his life. Exhibitions showcasing his photographs, both from personal collections and community submissions, highlighted the beauty he had captured in everyday life, preserving the vibrancy of his perspective, even after his passing. Annual commemorations were established, blending remembrance with education, offering workshops on safety, photography, and community engagement. Through these public initiatives, the town transformed grief into collective resilience, acknowledging the loss while channeling it into constructive action that reinforced community bonds. Dylan's story also reshaped local perspectives on vulnerability, responsibility, and communal care. Parents, educators, and peers reflected on the lessons learned from his disappearance, applying caution without fostering fear, and emphasizing awareness, communication, and attentiveness in daily life. The case highlighted the human cost of unresolved crimes, showing how the absence of closure can ripple through families, friendships, and entire communities. At the same time, it reinforced the potential for hope and resolution when persistence, science, and collaboration intersect. The lessons were practical, emotional, and enduring, influencing both civic engagement and individual vigilance in Pennsylvania. On a broader scale, Dylan Mercer's journey from missing college student to symbol of perseverance and justice inspired similar initiatives elsewhere. Cold case units in neighboring states and national organizations studied the case as a model for integrating DNA reanalysis, community involvement, and family advocacy. Conferences and workshops cited Dylan's story, examining how investigative diligence combined with technological innovation could lead to resolution even after decades. Victim support organizations highlighted the importance of maintaining hope, staying connected with law enforcement, and promoting programs that empower families navigating prolonged uncertainty. His legacy became both local and national, a reminder that persistent efforts could reshape outcomes even in the darkest circumstances. For Dylan's family, every step forward in remembrance and advocacy was a way to keep his personality, dreams, and energy alive. They spoke at schools, addressed local law enforcement gatherings, and participated in media interviews, emphasizing not just the tragedy of loss but the power of action and awareness. Friends and former classmates contributed to exhibitions, scholarships, and mentorship programs, turning personal grief into community-wide opportunity. Each initiative ensured that Dylan's life continued to resonate, bridging the gap between memory and forward motion. His legacy was no longer limited to the narrative of a cold case. It became a story of inspiration, influence, and societal contribution. Even as the legal chapter of Dylan's case concluded, questions remained that kept his story relevant and compelling. How could society prevent similar tragedies in the future? Could awareness, advocacy, and proactive community engagement reduce the likelihood of young people vanishing unnoticed? Dylan's life, though cut short, offered a blueprint for action, preserving memories, applying lessons learned, and empowering communities to confront both uncertainty and danger with knowledge and courage. The town, through its parks, exhibitions, and educational efforts, demonstrated that the human cost of crime could be transformed into collective learning and resilience. In reflecting on Dylan Mercer's legacy, one sees a story that transcends the initial tragedy. His life, his disappearance, and the eventual justice served created ripples that affected families, law enforcement, communities, and aspiring youth. Each photograph he captured, each initiative established in his name, and each policy reform inspired by his case reinforced the enduring value of his existence. The pain of loss was balanced by the lessons imparted and the hope sparked, creating a continuum of remembrance and action. Dylan's story became a touchstone, illustrating that persistence, technology, and community advocacy could intersect to honor a life while preventing future loss. Ultimately, Dylan Mercer's legacy is a testament to the power of human resilience in the face of tragedy. Through family dedication, community action, and systemic reform, his memory continues to shape awareness, inspire reform, and encourage vigilance. While the arrest and trial closed one chapter, Dylan's story lives on, teaching lessons about persistence, justice, and the collective responsibility to protect young lives. How would his life continue to inspire future generations? Could his story prevent similar tragedies in Pennsylvania and beyond? The answer lies in remembrance, education, and the unyielding commitment of those determined to ensure that Dylan Mercer's life, though tragically cut short, leaves an enduring impact on the world around him. Through the relentless pursuit of truth, Dylan Mercer's story evolved from a haunting cold case into a powerful testament to resilience, persistence, and the transformative potential of science. His disappearance in Pennsylvania in 2001 had cast a long shadow over his family, friends, and community, leaving questions that seemed impossible to answer. Yet decades of unwavering advocacy, tireless investigation, and the eventual breakthrough in DNA technology proved that time alone does not define the limits of justice. Families across the state and beyond saw a renewed sense of hope, understanding that unresolved grief can find resolution, and that long silent voices can finally be heard. Investigators, inspired by the resolution of Dylan's case, revisited cold cases nationwide, emboldened by the knowledge that modern forensic methods can overturn years of uncertainty. The story demonstrated that persistence, combined with evolving technology, can transform despair into justice, offering closure not only for individual families, but for entire communities. Dylan's memory became more than a tragic narrative. It became a catalyst for systemic change. Scholarships, community programs, and public memorials ensure his name is associated, not with loss alone, but with education, advocacy, and opportunity. His life, though cut short, left a lasting imprint on those who knew him and on the structures designed to prevent similar tragedies. Dylan Mercer's story is a reminder that victims must never be forgotten, that accountability is essential, and that perseverance can restore hope. Let this story inspire action. Honor the lives lost, demand justice, and continue the fight to resolve every cold case no matter how much time has passed.